Hello, I'm Yvette L. Cummings. Today I'm going to talk to you about my exhibition, Everything Will Be Okay. Coming up with the title for an exhibition is always tricky. And so when I was really pondering what to do for this exhibition, I thought about kind of the culmination of the body of work that talks about not only trauma when I was a child, working through that, and how I'm talking about that today for future generations. And so the idea that everything will be okay, especially in today's time of quarantine, has another meaning to it. But I think about the fact of survivorship. And so talking about childhood trauma, childhood sexual trauma in particular, not everything is going to be great, but you will make it. And so to me, that everything will be okay kind of takes you beyond, and that you could see a future for yourself even if things have been bad in general. So I've been exploring ideas of childhood trauma basically since I was in undergrad. I began using abstraction as a way to talk about kind of physical trauma and the way that we internalize trauma and can manifest itself on the surface of our skin, especially if we're not really dealing with it in a healthy way. That internalization can really kind of grow and fester, and we can't always hide that. And so as I have matured as a person, as an artist, I started to use the figure and become more comfortable about being upfront with what the content is really talking about. So I have worked through representing it as myself, using children as a way to show myself in those ages, and how as becoming a mother, that has changed my perception of my own trauma, my own experiences, and then how that is affecting my three daughters, the way that I see them being treated in society, perceptions, policing of what they wear, all these types of things. And so it's really been this progression out of my own trauma, talking about that for others, and how I see kind of my position as a way to talk about these things for future generations and kind of empower those perceptions for ourselves and for other people. This is the piece, Mother Don't Worry. This is one of the newest pieces in the exhibition, just finished in this last few months. And what you'll see throughout the whole exhibition is kind of a repeat of my daughters. Now, it's not necessarily important that you know them as my daughters all the time. They are really my models, lucky them, who are kind of stand-ins for myself, for other women at specific ages. And so that's really important as you see. You will see the connection, you'll see that they're the same girls over and over again, but they are my constant models throughout the show, throughout my work. With this piece, I take a lot of influences from other artists' work. For this piece, our masked figure here is a reference to a Frida Kahlo piece where she has a young girl in a skeletal mask. And that idea of hiding ourselves kind of goes back to some of my early work. I like this idea that we are constantly not presenting our total selves to the world, that we all have something that we're hiding, and we are sometimes willing to give that information to others, but not always. So even as a child, that they have a lot of their own secrets, and especially if you're a child of trauma, of sexual abuse, that idea of trust and who you're willing to say things to becomes really important. You'll see also within the work that I use repeated patterns throughout, and for me that's a type of camouflaging, and I can get into that more later as well. With our second figure here, the fact that she's hidden under this blanket, but she's also revealing the space beyond. And to me, that kind of goes back to what that future can hold. That while the rest of the piece kind of dark, it's the weight of the blanket, the fact that she's really staring us down versus this one who's hiding but blatantly in front of us. To me, that idea of the sky, that opening, shows that there's a future, that there can be this other that can be experienced by these children, by other people as well. So it takes a very flat space and allows you to see that we can go beyond this moment in time in their lives, in the trauma that's happening to them right now. All right, so this piece, The Myriad of Moments Led Us Here, is a work that is based off of a couple other influences. I got this gesture of myself through looking at what are called medical moulages. And a medical moulage is usually a wax-based figure of a female form that are based in, so there's a lot of connotations with them, but they were meant as, they started out as medical teaching tools, that panels could be removed and that you could see the insides of the forms for research purposes. But most of these medical moulages that you see, they're full-scale women, but they're usually laying in poses that are very much kind of this like, woe is me. They're very open and susceptible, and they are not in the position of power, we'll put it that way. So this is one that my position is based off of one that's much smaller, that's only about this tall. Usually they're full scale, and the figure was doing this, that they were looking away, which is unusual for a moulage because usually, again, they are very open. And so I liked that fact that I could be fully exposed, but not a willing participant. And I think that that is really an idea when we think about those who are abused, traumatized, that sometimes you are in this position where, yes, you want to fight against this, but you don't always have the power to do that. And by creating this space where I am open, I mean, I'm all filled out there, that there really is no hiding. But the fact that I did this spot in black and white, the same as the pattern, also flattens me out, and it can kind of hide me that way, that they become visually even with each other. And so while it is usually when we show something that is open and show the viscera and the guts, that it can be kind of gruesome, but by doing that, that really sets it back, that it takes you a moment to see just how exposed this woman is and how women in general and trauma and things can leave you feeling that way. I also have where you'll see that of course, this figure is completely naked, but the male counterpart is not. He also has his back to us, which shows that while these two are physically close in space, he's not participating or really paying attention to what is happening here. He also, if we were to have this figure stand up, would be much larger than her. We could see that his scale, that hierarchic scale, would be much bigger than her. And that shows the sense of power. So even though he is seated, he is behind her, he still holds a lot of power within that piece because we could presume what's happening. I also like to play around with temperature of the painting. So if you look at him, he's much warmer. He's painted a lot more of these red tones. And my figure has a lot more of these purples and blues and these kind of cool pinks. And I like that push of that contrast, that this kind of shows more of this warmth and life, and then also kind of the sense of power, but through these blues and purples. And you'll see that repeated in some of the pieces as well, where the hands and things are very blue. To me, that shows kind of a clenching, that you have let the circulation stop because you're just so tense about everything that's going on. So I like to play with that within the pieces as well. Pattern is going to be seen throughout the exhibition over and over again. And I use it for a few different ways, but within this one I was really interested in pieces like Matisse's Red Room, if you're familiar with that, where the background wallpaper and the table itself have the exact same pattern. There's no scale shift, there's no perspective shift, they are exactly the same, and that we get this sense of a space, but it also really flattens it. And I like that flattening. To me, it talks a lot about memory, that if I'm thinking back to a moment where something occurred, that I don't see all those details. I don't see really far back in space. So by flattening these patterns within the pieces, that makes you really concentrate on everything that's right up front, that you really can't sneak too far back into the space, and you're really confronted with that. But in our memories, that's the same way, that the background, the details, they aren't as specific. Now I do have up in this one a little sneaky guy here, which kind of throws off that theory of what's happening in the background space. So this is a little anole who is eating a dragonfly. And this is something that we caught in our, we were able to take a picture of in our garden. But what I like about that is for the anole, this is just the everyday occurrence. You know, he's going to feed himself. This is something that is just necessary for survival. And there's a lot of things we do that are necessary for survival. And so those who have had traumatic experiences, the way that we deal with life, we move forward, are necessary for survival. And so there's a lot of violence in this, but it is a necessary violence. And I like to try to play down violence or present, really guttural things, not in a very kind of thrown it in your face type of way, but there's a subtlety to that. So this piece right here is one of several furniture sculptural pieces that I have within the exhibition. This is kind of a new aspect to my body of work that I've been doing for the last couple of years. So sculpture is not necessarily something that I've done for years and years. What I like about using these furniture pieces is they are really a throwback to ideas of childhood furniture forts, this rearranging of your spaces. For me, these places were where a lot of my abuse occurred. So they hold kind of that meaning, and I'll talk about that further with some of the other pieces as well. I also like this kind of switch of using the furniture as a representation, almost as a figure itself as well. And so a lot of the scale of them, especially something like this, it's a smaller scale. These are child chairs that are meant for little kids. And so I like the fact that they are not of adult scale, that it reflects back to these ideas of childhood. And what kind of scale does, how you perceive the world when you are little versus adult. So for a little kid, something like this, it's perfect scale. It's perfect scale for hiding in, to get away from those bad things that may be occurring in your life. But they also are perfectly fit for you too, and there's a comfort in that as well. So I also like the idea that things are not stable. So the fact that we don't have just this nice stacking that probably most of us would have done as kids, making sure that everything won't fall down on us when we're building a child fort, taking the couch cushions apart. But I like the fact that this chair really could topple at any time, and I like that instability. A lot of us, feel that way for many different reasons, but within the context of these, one wrong move, the child inside of it, if they move too fast, that's going to topple on them, and that is often kind of that psychological feel that you're really doing this balancing act of how do you move forward in the world, how do you deal with what's happening to you, and that you might not feel you have any stable place or person to talk to when these types of traumas are happening to you. So this piece is called Magdalena, and Magdalena is my youngest daughter. The name Magdalena, of course, in and of itself holds a lot of religious connotation, Mary Magdalene, etc. And so you see remnants of that within the piece as well. This has that Madonna and child feel, which is much more kind of South American type of representation. Think of votive cards and things like that. I grew up Catholic. I'm not a religious person myself, but that imagery has such a strong base in art history. So of course it's something that I've studied for many years as well. Within this piece we have a couple different things going on. If you look here at kind of the head of the Madonna figure, we see that it's all these nodules and things. That's a throwback to some of the early work I did where I used kind of cancerous tumors to show the way that we internalize trauma, and that it will fester and grow within you uncontrollably sometimes. But also this idea of being a mother, artist, survivor, all these things that are put upon all of us, and that list is different for each one of us. But for me, how the fact that trying to compartmentalize trying to stay stable in all these, that these can fester and grow in our own mind and lead to anxiety, and they can, if not dealt with, they can also grow in our heads as well, and just kind of being torn into all these different areas of your life. So that's why the face is represented in that way. You also will notice that we have these 3 sets of arms within this piece, and this to me represents a couple different aspects. So I like the idea of kind of this throwback to Hindu goddesses, where you see that there's, you know, an array of 20 arms around. And a lot of that shows this idea of time and movement. So it's not one person with 20 arms, it's really this idea of motion. And I like the idea that the arms here of the Madonna are at one point kind of flailed out. That could be an exasperation, that can be I'm open or I am just tired. And also this kind of gesture of lifting. So having the hands open and then with the child in the hands, it is this lifting up of this life, a kind of a presentation of next generation, of what, you know, I hope to accomplish, that my children don't have the same experiences that I had. That's kind of that triple action. You'll also see that, as I talked about before, the color of the hands are really red and raw, and I like this idea of this rawness that can come through worry. Part of my own anxieties show up in my hands, in wringing of them, but this kind of just that idea of raw activity within them. One of the most kind of, I think, can jar people with this piece is the fact that I've actually cut the canvas. As an artist, cutting your canvas is very traumatic in and of itself, because once you do that, you can't go back. This area is something that represents kind of the birth of my children. I had 3 C-sections. So that birthing, having children, giving birth for sexual abuse survivors can be very traumatic because of it can really bring you back to that trauma. And so that's a lot for survivors to deal with. So this idea of that opening and of being displayed in another way really kind of plays into everything that happens up here as well. We also see that within the opening there's another pattern here, and so you don't get far into that space. While I have revealed this occurrence, you are not given that full story. So we'll see that again in some of the other pieces too, but I still block you. I'm willing to give you just enough and see that there's a trauma. It has that red wallpaper there that shows, you know, this is a kind of a surgical type of thing, but it is not over the top. That we still see that, you know, this is definitely a cut, it's definitely a violation, but I don't have to give you all the kind of blood and gore. I can keep it in that kind of beautiful realm to make you able to kind of look at that and then build up to all the other aspects that are there. So this is a piece called Burden, and within this work we have a couple different things going on. As you can see that this is a self-portrait, and then we have my daughter taking a ride on the back there. And I like within titling the works a couple kind of plays on words, is this idea that you know, sometimes this carrying of a form can be a burden. You know, we think about just, you know, ways life changes with motherhood, etc. But it's more so in this idea of what we, kind of the baggage we carry with us. And this fact that there are studies about kind of historical trauma, that we can carry over trauma to future generations through kind of that birthing process. That is nothing that we can control. And so this idea that while I believe my children are having a very different childhood than I had, that my traumas are not there, but they are affected also because of the way that I experienced my youth and how I interact with them. But I'm also constantly carrying this burden of my own history with me. So that's kind of where that title comes from there. The second aspect of this piece is it was made around the time that we had some severe flooding in Conway about 3 years ago now. And I took reference from a friend's house that had about 4 feet of water in their house, and the way that that staining from the Waccamaw River, what that looked like on the wall, and I could see the water line slowly recede, and just the kind of mud and that tea color that occurs here. And that fact that we will have times of flood and receding within our lives, that good experiences will occur and bad experiences will occur, and they come and go. They always leave a mark, and the staining on the wall is that idea of that mark is there. And we can remove this paper, and that mark is still always there with us. So we see within the wallpaper that we have this Harvey pattern, and then we have the damask pattern behind it. And I like this idea of kind of that revealing of the past as well, is that we can build over top of it over and over and over, but it finds its way out. And here, because of the flood, because of this action, that has revealed itself, that whether they wanted it to occur or not, it was there. I purposely picked these red guttural colors because of that fact of it's to reference our inside. I like this idea of using a space as a form of the body as well. So it's an injury, it's a revealing of history within that. Some spots it's just like a slight peel, others we see that it is blatantly there. Within this pattern, that idea of that harpy is something that I liked the idea of the history of that form, that what started out as a creature that was much more just kind of a siren, a way to speak of coming weather and things, but now is seen as this kind of old woman and has this kind of bad connotation. And so as an aging person, the perceptions of self versus youth also kind of comes into play. And I think it plays back to this idea of the burden of motherhood and what's going on with my children, where we sit in that. So this piece is called the Red Wallpaper, and this is based off of ideas from the short story called The Yellow Wallpaper that some of you might be familiar with. And the Yellow Wallpaper is based in Victoria era, and at that time women dealing with postpartum depression and things would be isolated. The children would be kind of taken away, they'd be put in a room that had very little stimulus. And in the Red Wallpaper, the woman who's suffering from this slowly goes kind of crazy because she's not getting the help that she needs. She keeps speaking to her husband, who happens to be a doctor in the story, and she's not being heard that she is having these issues. And a lot of women face that we are seen as with physical ailments, mental ailments. It's a hysteria. It is not real. It is hormones, etc. And so if we think about kind of the path that we have improved with the way that we treat women with postpartum depression, we still have a long way to go, but that's kind of that basis of that. And so women are often not heard. We're not listened to, that we try to tell our stories, we're not believed. So we have plenty of rape and assault victims that are not listened to. We as mothers who may be suffering from postpartum depression are not listened to, not taken seriously. So that's a lot of where this piece comes from. The fact that the red wallpaper is my version of that yellow wallpaper, red is often seen as this harsh color. It has visceral body connotations, and the fact that I'm ripping my mouth up, that I've been trying to get my words listened to be heard, and it's not happening. And in this moment of frustration where just pulling your mouth up to reveal everything that's inside, but again, like I talked about before, we are blocked, that there is another wallpaper there, that there is another layer that we would have to get by. So I would have to pull this one down and pull the next one and the next one and the next one. And we're not sure how long it would take and how far back we would have to go before someone would pay attention to that story that we have there. By having myself naked, it is a vulnerability. So, putting yourself completely out there, there's no hiding with this one. And with the fact, again, that this idea of ripping your mouth up, it's a very violent act. But once again, I'm not showing it in that violence, that it's not painted as the muscle and the sinew and all of that, that it is a very, it's almost subtle in that way, even though you can't not look at kind of all that action that's happened there. But it's really about having our voices heard. Again, in the Yellow Wallpaper, she was not listened to, and today we still have a really hard time to be listened to and taken seriously about these issues. So this is a piece, The Site of Experience, and one of the newest pieces in the exhibition. Within this work, it was from some reference that I took quite a while ago, and just kind of sat there. And as artists, you'll find that you can compile imagery, and it has to kind of wait for that right moment. So this was built off of the piece Mother Don't Worry, and I liked kind of this switching to these open spaces. So a lot of the work within the exhibition is very closed space, that you don't get the sense of vastness. And to me, there's something about, if I'm thinking about transitions from victim to survivor and what happens next, I think that opening of that space becomes important, and thinking beyond what's happening here and that there is more going on out there. To me also though, images like this where we have these vast skyscapes, that they also are patterned in and of themselves. And so I think it plays into some of those same types of elements that we have in the other work. These two figures are actually laying on a bed on top of each other. Now, of course, we don't see that in this because I've changed their orientation. And so now they very much have this crucifixion feel, which was not intentional. We can go back to some of the other religious imagery that I have referenced, but it was not something that was forward in my mind as I created that. But it is unavoidable when people look at the piece. So within that, I could talk about ideas of ascension, of trauma, of working through moments, of what, again, is happening next there. I like the separation of color by isolating this figure with these blues. Again, I've talked about that a little bit before, but here we have that whole figure. And to me, it can talk about kind of the layering of past and present. And we don't know necessarily if this is the same figure or if it is two separate figures, if this is a transition. And because this piece is kind of new, I myself am working through what that moment means as well. And I think the viewers can come at that, especially if they have a strong religious feeling. Religious imagery is going to come forward to them and their own experiences within the church as well. So I am playing around too with figures themselves. We don't have the top half. It's one of the few ones where we don't have the figure confronting us, that it's a more almost passive type of experience with them, that there's not that confrontation. And so I think that this play on how we then can put ourselves into those situations, that I'll talk about too with the Voyeur series, comes into a little bit more play with this piece. With this diptych here, this really came about through a couple different reasons. My older daughter came to me to talk about a friend who was harming themselves. So this is something that we know that teenage girls in particular do a lot through, and boys as well, but through cutting, through scratching. This friend was marking herself pretty violently with pens and things. And so it made me think about the way that my trauma has manifested through anxiety, but also through scratching. So like, panic attack, I'm someone who's a scratcher and a grabber. And so these, again, kind of these physical outcries that we oftentimes will inflict self-pain, sometimes unconsciously as part of our panic, part of our anxiety, but other times as kind of cries for help, that we want that to be seen to a certain level. We may not always realize that. And it, to me, speaks to this duality of kind of the younger version, let's say, of myself, and then my current self here. And so the idea that the figures are not looking at us, we see through a lot of the exhibition that you get that eye contact with the figures. characters, that they're not looking away, that they want to really bring you into the situation and that you can't get out of it, that you have to kind of face what they're facing. But this one, this is kind of part of that shame, or that kind of wanting to hide everything, to show the world that everything is okay, that there is nothing really going on here. So by not confronting you, even though they're presenting these moments that are really, they're gripping, they're traumatic. You see in this piece, you can see again that redness, that rawness that is happening on the skin. Here you can feel that pull of the flesh, that this is not just this gentle grab of moving your own arm, that you want to feel something, but you don't want to necessarily engage everyone else in that moment. Within this piece, you see that the pattern is really overwhelming here. There's just a ton of different patterns within that. And I liked the idea that the figures they're almost being engulfed with it. Like, it takes us a moment to kind of get there, that we are up and moved about into that. But even the coloration within the flesh can reflect back into some of that patterning, and that there can be this hiding in that camouflage I talked about before, that they want to remain hidden within there. So a lot of it is kind of me as an older person, that younger version, and here you can see that kind of aging that's happening. Again, I'm concentrating on those blues and purples, that rawness, and that there's not that new soft fleshness, that I've been through these things, and this is where I still am, that it's still not perfect all the time with that. So you'll see a couple examples of some hand-cut paper collage pieces within the exhibition. And collage is something that I have been working with basically since grad school. I use it as a way to create standalone pieces, but they are also kind of a sketching. So a lot of us do drawing and sketchbooks and things, but I find through a collection of magazines and newspapers and even digital imagery that it is a way to build ideas, and sometimes quickly. So when you're working on a lot of these large-scale pieces, they can become overwhelming, and sometimes you need that satisfaction of having a finished work that is separate. So a lot of times the collages kind of build off of that as kind of the starting point. They also are a way for me to tell kind of these short stories too. It is important to me that you know that these are not digitally created imagery, that you know that I cut them by hand, that they're glued down. And so within a lot of the pieces, you'll still see text within that, and that's kind of where some of that starts, where there's an oddity to it, where there might be part of a term as well. And that's to show the kind of imperfection, that you know it is done by hand. Oftentimes I will choose text on purpose because it does play into that overall context. So our piece on the bottom here, which is titled For Show, but also says For Show, that we can see that sometimes in these images of children at play, that there's this kind of showing off that students and children don't always understand kind of the full extent of the way they may be harassing a schoolmate, teasing, kind of bullying in a way. For me, that speaks more towards kind of body shaming and that type of imagery. And so for me, that For Show, it's that showing off that can occur, that is a game, but it's not a game, that has often really big consequences for those involved. I had mentioned before that I use a lot of influences from other artists within my paintings. With this work, this is influenced by Picasso's The Saltimbanques, where you see his circus performers, where there's a group of 3 men and a young girl, and then there's a woman way off into the corner who has a hat on and things. So I've set my figures up in a very similar composition to that. I've always liked that piece because I always felt like the group over here had isolated the woman, was kind of judging her, but they were taking the child kind of away and separating her out. So I really liked that idea of kind of isolation. I also have influence within this piece. I was making it just past the time where Gail King was interviewing R. Kelly about accusations against him. And within that interview, she sat there very stoically as he was getting physical, he was standing up, he was overpowering and pointing at her as he was trying to defend himself. And that's where our blue male figure comes in, is that he is darker. Again, we've got this kind of scale shift within him, that he is over her, that she has lost her coloration. We see a lot of the palette is very intense. It's something I've really enjoyed doing a lot more recently. I kind of play back and forth with that, but that his presence is kind of in this darker half. There's this ominous, but again, he is going over her, the way that she's not looking at him, and that sense of dominance. But we also have kind of this use of this split. And like I talked before about having this kind of open blue sky, this is maybe that potential for the future versus what has happened in the past within my experiences, within others' experiences. And as this is, again, not necessary, but my daughters and a couple of their friends, that what can happen in their future, the fact that we're having conversations about this more openly. The Me Too movement in the last couple of years really got traction, got their voices heard, that these are conversations that I can have with them, I can have with all of you, that really can open up, so maybe that we don't have to have such, that these things don't have to be hidden as much, that we can stand in the moment and not necessarily have to sit with these things for 40 years before that we can have them come out there. I utilize the pattern kind of variations within the pieces to create that same type of camouflage that I had before. This kind of goes into, and I'll talk about it with some of the furniture pieces, this idea that multiple patterns, while jarring, also flatten space as well, because your eye wants to kind of equalize them and you can't quite focus on one area. So it really makes you have to kind of pay attention and move around within that. So I like the fact that she can have this really active pattern that shows a lot of motion that is very similar to what's happening in the background space. It's kind of more abstract approach to the ground plane. And then other areas that are more stylized, that are very structured. It really separates to me kind of the points maybe that they're at within their timeline, within their experiences as well. This piece is titled The Old Fox, and that's really another kind of play on words. With maturity comes different ways of coping with trauma. I talked about going from victim to survivor, and then that kind of perception of how my children are being harassed and things. And so this idea that you are no longer necessarily the one that is in that position where necessarily the harassment is going to be happening to you, but you should take that maturity and see how you can help others. And so this is more of kind of a self-portrait of looking out of what was before this kind of that idea of memory, of youth. We see that this figure is much more stylized, and so to me that speaks more of memory, part of, you know, this is me then, and innocence just played. And then this would be kind of the me now. And the fox itself kind of stands for that aging, that maturity. So the old fox can be a play on being an older woman, but also she's a fox. And I like that kind of idea and that play with those two. With this piece, you'll see that the background is treated a little bit differently in the way that I've used the pattern. And so as an artist, you know, painting these very strict patterns, I love doing that, but I needed a way to kind of express pattern and space a little bit differently. So I wanted to go back to some of my early roots where I started out primarily as an abstract painter and bring some of that loose brush strokes back into the work, but have it still feel like these pattern spaces. So it's a much looser approach to that. Still flattens the space, still creates this weird kind of visual play of the space. And that's why this aspect is a little bit different than some of the other ones that you will see. I liked the contrast that occurred between these highly active spaces and then that flat pink, that we sometimes need an area of rest too, that we can think about that psychologically, but also within a painting that we have so much going on here and we can read so much into that story that having this kind of bordered in can give us a place of rest and a place to stop. That if we let this just expand, it's almost too much. And especially when we have it set on another pattern here, that having that visual break gives me a little bit of rest before I'm kind of bombarded again with more space, more pattern. This is the installation piece titled Stacked. This was really the piece that started me on the path of other furniture sculpture here. I had this idea that I wanted to create the pattern spaces that you see in the paintings where there are multiple types of patterns that are flattening that space, but that you as the viewer could be the participant in that space, that suddenly you were part of that camouflaging that occurred at an actual scale. This is a throwback again to that idea of childhood pillow forts, that children are notorious for taking apart the living rooms, putting dining room tables together, all these things to create these spaces that become kind of these exploration. They can be anything. For me, this was something that was a space that was hidden, and so trauma could occur, that sexual abuse could occur, and no one would suspect. And that's why you see that this piece is once again very unstable, that we have almost the swirly effect that happens, that the way that this furniture is stacked is not how children would stack it, but that there is very much that this could come tumbling down at any moment, that there's not safety in here. The use of the black and white, I can't think of really kind of the origins of that, but this damask pattern is something that you'll see over and over again. And there's something about the stark contrast between these two that I really felt I could utilize and play around with. That you don't have, there's not the distractions of everything else. You know, that everything that you see in the paintings, for the most part, are very colorful, very vibrant. But this is much more kind of subdued with that palette that makes you pay attention to some of those kind of small details that are going on there. And I think that it also helps kind of with that flattening of space, even though it is total spatial piece there, that we can get lost in it. It becomes almost overwhelming. It's really hard to focus in one spot, and so I like that idea that you are uncomfortable, that you kind of want to explore it, but at the same time, visually, it becomes almost too much for you to want to look at for a long period of time. So this work is called Can I Have a Ride? And this was inspired from a ride home from school. I pick up my girls and we ride our bikes home. And my eldest daughter, who was about 10 or 11 at the time, was harassed by some gentlemen working and asked if they could have a ride on her bike. And people often talk about how they would react in that situation. And you don't react how you would think, because you have to protect your 3 children and get out of that situation. And she didn't understand the scope of what he said and what that implied, but I sure did, and I was angry. Harassment, trauma, it starts at a very early age for women, and a lot of people are not fully aware of that. So within this work, this really plays off of some of that collage work that I do before. So not only do I do hand-cut paper collage, but when I am composing on the computer, oftentimes I'm pulling from a lot of sources. And I like, again, when things are a little bit off. To me, it kind of sets up for this very kind of surreal scenario. And when you see things that are slightly askew, you know that not everything's right, that there is, that while some things are more blatant, sometimes when there's just a little shift, you know that there's something wrong with the reality that's occurring there. So that's why sometimes you see a more subtle shift. Sometimes, like here, where a gentleman is cut in half, there's a blatant shift that we can see in the collage of this pattern to that situation where the gentlemen are there as kind of these overseers. They are behind, they are loose, they are involved, but they don't necessarily see themselves as, you know, that gentleman in this situation thought he was being funny, you know, and that's unfortunately part of the larger conversation of what I'm trying to get at there, that this is, you know, locker room talk, we're just teasing. And these gentlemen kind of represent that they are back behind, the fact that they are looser, that means that they're not fully there, they're not fully engaged, but she sure is. She is right up front, that this is something that is definitely happening to her, and we have to kind of face that. Having these figures here, this is just children at play. My daughter, other kids, they're playing, they're walking home from school, they're, you know, riding their bikes. They are just doing what kids do. These kids are just here playing. But we can, as adults, sexualize that, recontextualize it in a way that they might not understand, but we should know better. And these gentlemen should have known better. And so that's really the impetus of that this is playing out just kind of this innocent, this specific situation, and then that kind of juxtaposition of space from that. This is a small grouping of a series that I did between 2015 to about 2018, almost 2019. And in total, I had created 50 pieces at this scale. And this came about because, kind of like I spoke about with the collage pieces, as a studio artist who is also a professor and mother and all these things, time becomes really important in your studio practice. And so every kind of moment within a piece counts. And I had a couple large-scale paintings that were giving me a lot of trouble. So I needed to have kind of something to get that sense of accomplishment and kind of redirect my focus, kind of take me out of what was happening in those other pieces. So I set myself up a few ground rules for these pieces that could become kind of methodical, but as it started out with that, it became its own beast after that. So I knew I wanted to have these small scale, these are about 14 by 14 inches, that I wanted to have a flat background, that the pattern that you see in each one of them is exactly the same. So I used the same pattern template for all this cut paper in each one, and then I would have a series of figures within those that are taken from storybooks that would have been from 30s, 40s, 50s type of thing, that they're very stylized, simple, just children at play. And those are kind of my ground rules within that. But what I was looking for is specific figures that, well, these are children just doing everyday things that children do. They're playing with dolls, they're playing with each other, they might be reading a book. The way that they've been represented within the illustrations can be very easily transitioned into much more adult perceptions of them. That we can suddenly have something that is as innocent as, you know, a young girl laying on a bed, the way that someone is kneeling, where their skirt is slightly open, that suddenly these are very sexualized images. And it is something that is on us as adults. And I throw this to the way that we police girls with dress codes, where we tell girls in particular ways to stand, ways to play. Even young children, you know, who are wearing bikinis on the beach, we're instantly sexualizing children, which is part of the greater problem that I'm trying to discuss and put that on us as adults. And so a lot of people don't see that in their work at first. And I think that speaks a lot to their own experiences. If you're not someone who had these experiences, it may take you longer to get there, and that's okay. Or you may not get there at all. You may just enjoy them as these kind of nostalgia images. But for those who have, they do see that and they understand where I'm coming from with it. And I use from this particular time period because it has this sense of innocence that we kind of put to what was happening in the 50s. We know that's not 100% true for everyone's history then, but it's this kind of overall perception that we do. The figures are really graphically painted, and for the most part, we don't see their heads at all, or faces are cut at the eyes. The features are very simplified. And for me, that's a way for us to kind of put ourselves into that figure. So if you're someone who has experienced trauma or a similar situation, that might take you to that moment, or that we might be able to have that moment of empathy of putting ourselves into there. So by not having it specific, in the same way that a lot of the other larger scale pieces are, that it kind of can invite you into that scenario, think about how you are presented, and that, or maybe even your own children in ways that you didn't think they would be perceived by other people. Here in the museum, we have 2 groupings of 12 each. When we have the whole series, it really becomes about kind of this statistics and kind of these overwhelming numbers, that there are, I believe 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused at some point in their life, and I think it is 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 young boys. And when we see those types of numbers, you can start to feel kind of that burden of how many children are affected by this in a range of ways, but that it is very relevant to a large part of the population. This piece is called When the Magpie Came, and this work was done about the time my 3rd daughter was born, Magdalena, who was also called Maggie, and the magpie. So that's kind of her way of sneaking into the piece, partially. But on the larger note is, sometimes as artists, making the decisions of a painting, you try things, you try this, try that, and they're just not working compositionally. So, kind of the formula of the paintings I do is figure, pattern, shallow space. And I wasn't finding a floral pattern that was really working for this piece. And because we had this new figurative addition that we were referring to as the magpie, I liked that idea of taking the bird form and making that into the pattern. And a magpie itself is a pretty vicious bird. So I did some research on them. They like to attack people. They're very territorial, but they're also very smart birds as well. Now, I'm not saying my youngest daughter is vicious and a brilliant genius, but I liked using a different element to create pattern and to show that if I'm thinking about these ideas of history and trauma and kind of support of one another, different situations, not my own, but kind of protection with older sister, younger sister, the fact that the chaos of the magpies that are going on, that the fact that she is having them right on her, that they're digging into her flesh, and she's still sitting here stoically to show that strength that you have to have in order to survive. So for particular traumas and things. So I liked this chaos versus this calm, and the fact that she's sitting back here while she's all crunched up, she feels very protected even within all this chaos. We see within this piece too that not only are there these kind of little injuries that are occurring, but I also have this gigantic scrape on her leg there. And this is kind of a sneaking in back to some of those times where I like to show more of kind of that physical injury that can occur. But again, I mean, this is a big scrape, bruise, and we don't see that. We don't see that reflected in that face, and it really becomes more about strength. Now, if you are the child of an artist, and especially if you're the models, you gotta watch out, because I'm gonna take pictures of you when things happen. And so this is an actual scrape that she got falling out of a tree. And as artist mother, I went, wait, I gotta get a picture of that. It's gotta go in a painting. We sit here as humans with all sorts of scars, of injuries, some seen, some unseen. And this is a time where we can see a physical manifestation that we can relate to. We can have empathy much more so when we see that actual trauma, that actual injury. And it's much harder when those things are happening inside. And so this is one where it's much more on the surface, but we have that strength, we have that stoic nature that's sitting with that piece. So in this piece, we strive for a better outcome. We have a couple things here, and this is really kind of that internal, external struggle that happens between mother and child, and even within yourself. So oftentimes I have this kind of dual meaning within these, that this is my oldest daughter, or for anyone, you know, a child that is wanting their independence, but you want to hold on to and protect. And that struggle of knowing you have to let go, but you don't want them to have the same things happen to them that happen to you. And it really becomes this very circular battle that it is hard to escape from this as much as everybody wants to. And like we talked about, that's again why these hands are glued, because I'm just holding on for dear life. And she might want to get away, but I'm not ready yet. You know, this kind of really physical pushing against each other to get out of there. But we also see that the pattern here is really becoming part of them. And so what would be our clothes, our bodies, has really been taken over by the pattern, by that background space. So even the space and time that we are existing in is kind of holding us in there. And so this type of pattern that has the floral and the stripes with it allows it to feel like there's kind of three layers between the figures, the floral pattern, and the stripe, and that we're not sure in which space some of that is occurring. But I liked this kind of equalization, that we are part of those other spaces, even though we have so much that we are dealing with on this level as well. This is another one too, where we're not necessarily engaged with you, the viewers, that this is much more something about us. And what's going on here. You know, she's not even looking at me, you can't even tell where I'm looking at. And so it's much more about us in that moment, or these two people in this moment, versus anyone else. So this installation furniture piece here is taking my inspiration from using the furniture for things like pillow forts and thinking about the furniture as more of the figures themselves. So instead of, you know, all the painted figures we see in the rest of the exhibition, that the chairs themselves kind of stand in for an object, a person that has been traumatized. And we see that playing in with some of the ideas of layers and revealing kind of our history, that's what you see in the areas that are being kind of torn apart. We see that underneath there are 3 or 4 layers of different fabric, and to me that's that history, that the farther back we dig, we see a different layer and something different that's occurring within ourselves, within the chairs, within the figures, to talk about that history. We have these 2 chairs that are facing each other. There's, you think about that as confronting, but it's not in a way that is has a negative connotation. That these 2 are connected through this piece of fabric here. And for me that shows that you know, this person is not alone in the trauma that is occurring, that these 2 are experiencing it simultaneously, and that they may not want to be bound together by this, but that is happening. And so that piece of fabric really keeps them bridged, keeps them connected with that. We also see where there's kind of this spilling out of that history. And that goes back to, again, those kind of ideas of containment, that we can only contain these things that are within us for so long, and they will start to find their way out. So whether we're willing to, or just through you know, involuntary actions, that they do seep out, that they do find a way to be found.